Now on Money Talk 1010 AM, it's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there'll probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Here we are, and I just enjoyed listening to you and Sarge get it started in the 11 o'clock hour. Now we're here with Morgan Streetman once again at noon, and the replay at 5 if you don't get enough.
That's right. And if you don't get enough then you go to morganstreetmedia.com and you can link to our SoundCloud, our YouTube, and everything else. And listen to our past shows, which I can tell by the views is a very popular thing to do nowadays.
It is. That's where you want to go. That's where it's happening on YouTube.
Oh, and we got plenty to cover with you today, folks. I mean, we got all kinds of stuff to talk about. In fact, I got a whole show plan, and then I also have about, 30 additional articles, none of which even appear on the show plan. So we got
noticed that.
We got more than enough stuff to do today.
Just backup stuff.
And, of course, we got Marc Charles the legal man, in for Pat George today.
Reporting for duty.
Thank you for being here. Pat George is out having – is he still out having fun, or did he get back yet?
Well, it's another day, another Pat George out on a cruise ship, right?
Yeah, I know. It's like –
if you can't find him, he's in the Gulf.
It's like Groundhog Day or Deja Vu or something. Something. I mean, Pat is always on a cruise, but we're glad he's having a good time.
Yes,
he deserves it.
For sure.
He deserves it. Well, one of the things we found is a story over the weekend, and this is one we didn't want to spend too much time on, but we did want to take a quick look back at it because I thought it was fascinating. Did you see that thing that came out, the interview that came out on the Daily Star, which is a UK paper with The Rock, who I don't know if he's actually changed his name, but Dwayne The Rock Johnson, or is it just The Rock now? You might know.
It's just Dwayne Johnson.
It's just Dwayne Johnson. Okay.
He goes by DJ, actually.
Okay, so he hasn't changed his
that.
name. Okay, cool. All right. I was thinking he didn't, so that's good to know because, it's interesting. He's actually, a potential presidential candidate. But anyway, he's obviously developed a following among people, and they know him as being somebody who's very open-minded and not one who tends to criticize groups of people.
He's uplifting.
Yeah. But this interview came out, and, of course, it was played up in the Daily Star to say The Rock smacks down snowflakes, and it basically came out.
Catchy headline. Yeah,
catchy headline, and it came out, and it was an audio interview, right? And it quoted him as saying, Generation Snowflake, or whatever you want to call them, are actually putting us backwards. So it was a pretty negative statement about...
So he said this?
No. This is the thing.
Wow.
So this is why we wanted to bring this to your attention, because as we've told you on this show before... They now have programs using, artificial intelligence and stuff where they can take a little sound clip of somebody's voice, plug it into the computer, and then they can type up whatever they want and essentially have the person saying whatever they want to say.
So it wasn't The Rock, it wasn't DJ saying that. It was just a computer.
That's what he's come out now. And he said, he posted something. I did watch his video. He said, absolutely, positively, 100% fabricated. I never said those things, and that's not my personality. And those of you who know me know that. And there were a lot of people, because I looked on social media at this, there were people who had said, wait, that doesn't really even sound like him. Not the voice doesn't sound like him, but it just, he doesn't talk like that. He doesn't slam millennials and stuff like that. So here's what we've got. Now, the thing is, if you want to take it to another step, things that we've told folks about on our show, I mean, this technology where you can fake an interview like this, this is actually a couple of years old now. There's also technology out there that we brought to people's attention before, and this is going back 6 months to a year.
Video.
Where you can just take a little video clip of somebody, plug it in, and because the artificial intelligence can learn how their face moves, in response to them talking, you can then program them to say anything you want. And we demonstrated that with an Obama video. I mean, we didn't do it, but it was demonstrated to us.
Yes, this is wonderful news because if we ever say anything on air that we don't like, we can just say, it wasn't me. Someone edited it together. They used this software and duplicated my voice.
I guess we'll dock you for that day for the pay then, too.
That's right. Be careful with that one, Rox.
Okay.
This is going to be a new phenomenon, though. I'm telling you, this is going to be the new normal, is we're going to have videos and audios and interviews come out with people, and then they're going to go on and say it was 100% fabricated.
How do you authenticate it?
And who knows? Because, it sounds like The Rock is right. It sounds like he didn't say these things, and they did fabricate the interview. And, of course, The Daily Star pulled it down off their site, and it didn't even issue a correction or anything. And I think that probably tells you what really happened.
Sure.
Whoever reporter they had faked this interview, and then he knew it, and then he knew he was busted, and so they yanked it down. But I'll tell you, it's going to be something new. This is our brave new world that we live in, where we're going to have to question what we see in audio and video.
Can I ask, do you think it's they're targeting him because he's flirting with the idea of running for president, even though it sounds like nonsense anyway?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, and they might be just trying to say, look, Rock, don't forget politics is a blood sport. You know, do you really want to be involved in this? Because we can make stuff up about you, and we can take you down, man. Because I'll tell you, Marc Charles, if I had to pick the leading contender, and we're going to get into this, you know, because we're going to go through some of the Democratic presidential candidates, but I think he's the guy. I mean, if they want to win, they want to beat the Trump, you know, they're going to need to pick somebody like The Rock. They're going to need somebody who's bombastic, almost has that bigger-than-life air to him. You know, I think he's one of the strongest, and I feel silly saying that. It feels like idiocracy, really, you know, where pro wrestler becomes president. But honestly, I think that's the direction that we're moving in.
President Trump is president.
Exactly.
President Trump is actually a WWE Hall of Famer, so
right.
we're already there.
You're right.
And he's participated in wrestling matches. So we've already done this. This would be the second pro wrestler.
Right. So this is like
It's a great career path.
So
Which,
now, Marc
again,
Charles, you're a man ahead of your time, though. When you were tracking pro wrestlers, who knew? But these are the new politicians.
Actually, Ric Flair wanted to run for mayor of Charlotte a few years back. He called Jesse Ventura, who is the former governor of Minnesota, to ask his advice, and he told him, don't even try it because they will absolutely just destroy you.
Yeah.
Just based off of all of his speeding tickets. Just that alone. And so wrestlers aren't really the best choice.
And that analogy, to take it a step further, I heard you speaking earlier with the Sarge. It really is a great ring. It's a great arena to practice being the heel, disagreeing with someone for the public, but then off stage, your great friends going and having drinks after the show. That's politics. That's Washington.
Yeah. It's like how the Hulkster and the Nature Boy used to go have drinks together afterwards, right? You know, they're just putting on a show for the people. Well, I tell you what, we wanted to do a local interest segment here too because we got an interesting story. Now, this isn't all that local, but it comes out of Palm Beach, and I just wanted to share this with you because it caught my attention. And as a lawyer, you know, it just kind of sat with me, and that was an incident of a surgeon who had opened a poor lady up down in South Florida to perform basically a back operation on her. So you have to cut into your back and stuff and open everything up. And he saw something that he thought, well, that's out of place. That must be a tumor. I can see that. That shouldn't be there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Well, the only problem was that was her kidney. Ugh. And because of her own physiology and the way she'd grown up, it was kind of out of place in her body. The kidney hadn't gone to its right place, but she was living with it. She was fine.
I've heard of a couple instances like that. I know someone who has 3 kidneys. The kidneys don't always do what they're supposed to do or live where they're supposed to live. So that's interesting. But you only need one.
Well,
thankfully for her, right?
I guess so. I mean, you know, it's one of these questions. I thought it was interesting because that doctor only got fined by the Florida Department of Health, only got fined $3,000. And I thought, wow, was that a slap on the wrist or what? Now, apparently there was a medical malpractice case that was brought, and the other 2 doctors each settled for $250,000. And so I guess, and it's not 100% clear from the article, I guess that means she got $500,000 for this thing that they did. Of course, this was unconsented to surgery. You can't do unconsented to surgery, right? You have to have informed consent as the patient. The doctor's supposed to explain, here's what we're going to do.
Well, that's like in another country when someone puts you to sleep and takes your organs, right? That's why we have informed consent here.
Well, and in this case, they didn't even...
You heard those horror stories?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, like Turistas. Yeah, the movie. But in this case, they didn't even do anything with the kidney. It isn't like they took it to sell it. And, you know, these things can be very valuable on the black market, as you're pointing out. I mean, we've got stories out of India and stuff where they do drug people and take their kidneys and things like that. But this guy just made a mistake, this Dr. Ramon Vazquez. So anyway, he was fined $3,000 and, according to the story, settled the malpractice case for a nominal amount, which usually means like maybe $100, $1,000, something small. And I'm just thinking, man, that guy got away with it on that one.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, and there's a lot more of this kind of stuff that goes on than you would believe. I've had a case similar to this, not exactly the same, but where they did something once they cut somebody open that they didn't have consent for. It wasn't part of what they're supposed to be doing. And it's just amazing to believe that these highly trained surgeons who know the law make those kind of mistakes where they're in there and they're like, you know what, let me just work on this other thing here. I don't even have any idea what it is. We don't have any imaging studies of it, but let me just take that out and just play around while I'm in there. They don't always make the best decisions. They're people too. And I'll tell you what, from a medical malpractice perspective.
And you do a little bit of that.
Yeah, not much, a little bit. I've dabbled. I've done it before. But from that perspective, a lot of people think that, docs are wrongly targeted and things like that. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's just a lot of mistakes that are made in medicine, and they aren't the patient's fault. And like this instance, I mean, you'd have to wonder if she felt like she got really full value for that. I mean, because you got to take out lawyers' fees and expert fees and everything else out of that settlement. So at the end of the day, what is the patient who actually had their kidney basically stolen from them? And you could say, well, you're fine with the one kidney, but you know what? It wasn't your choice. They can't just open you up and take it from you and then decide that they'll pay you whatever they think it's worth, and it's not worth anything. So
sad, because it sounds like he thought he was trying to save her life.
Got some fascinating stuff to tell you about Bill Barr and Bob Mueller when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. I'm Roxanne Wilder. Morgan is here as he is every Monday, and we'll re-air this show at 5 p.m. too if you missed any important parts of it, which is all important when we're talking about politics, world events, local events. Marc Charles is here as well, and we're about to talk about a bromance.
Oh, the bromance that we didn't know was a bromance.
So you had to mention my name right before the bromance. Was that by design?
There's no hidden meaning there, Mark. We swear.
Right?
We swear. But no, this is something, doesn't this just smack you in the face about the swamp? I mean, I don't know if you heard this one because it kind of snuck under the radar last week, but Lindsey Graham had a meeting with the nominee to be Attorney General, right, which is William Barr. Remember, he was Attorney General under George H.W. Bush.
Right.
So he's an older gentleman. He's been around Washington and frankly, the swamp for a long time. And, of course, the president supposedly was picking him, to be a guy who was finally on his side after the whole debacle that was the attorney generalship of Jeff Sessions, at least with respect to the president's perspective. The president was bemoaning Jeff Sessions for big parts of time when he was AG and saying basically, I need somebody in there who will fight for me and who will protect me, et cetera. And so, the president's messaging on William Barr has kind of been he's going to be that guy. And, of course, we heard some media stuff about how William Barr is against the Bob Mueller investigation and other things. But then this comes out last week, and we had some audio for you, but I'll be honest, the audio is so poor quality, it's kind of hard to hear. But you ought to go out there and try to check it out because it is out there on YouTube, and that's Lindsey Graham talking about his meeting last week with William Barr. And he comes out of the meeting, and he basically says, I had no idea how close William Barr and Bob Mueller are. They are like best friends.
They've known each other for 30 years. Their wives do a Bible study together. I mean, they are really, really... So they're praying for each other.
They're really, really tight. So, I mean, from that, I'm going, goodness gracious. I mean, President Trump can't seem to pick somebody that isn't all tied up in all of these long-term Washington, D.C. relationships and get somebody like that in there to help him. Now, hopefully, Bill Barr, is, while he's friends with Bob Mueller, hopefully he rises above and does his job, separate and apart from that friendship. But I just have to tell you that based on what I'm hearing so far, it's not starting out very promisingly. I mean, this could be another redo of Jeff Sessions, which would be, pretty tough for...
Swampy.
Yeah, doesn't it seem swampy? Particularly for this to come out like this.
Yes.
Like even Lindsey Graham's like, I didn't know.
No clue.
And Lindsey Graham's a swamp creature. I mean, he's lived up there. I mean, he's tied in, and I like Lindsey Graham. Okay, sometimes. I mean, I don't mean to totally besmirch him, but he's a swamp creature. That's what he lives up there. He deals with all that, and for him to come out and say he didn't even know it, I mean, it's like, is William Barr another plant? Is he another plant? And you wonder,
find people who aren't related? No, because they all kind of come up together and do the same thing. So, I mean, it is, we know this in any industry. It's such a small world, even nationally. So all mixed together in D.C., of course, stuff like this happens.
Well, he should be, I mean, I think the vote might be this week for his the Senate confirmation vote. So, and I'm sure they'll be getting into some of this. So we'll get some more details as the week, or maybe it's next week, but whenever it is, as those hearings occur, I'm sure we'll get more details on that because I'm sure the senators will be asking about that some now that they've heard it. But anyway, speaking of the swamp, the shutdown continues, as we've talked about on Wide Open with Sarge, and it's now the longest ever shutdown. So we've now outpaced that shutdown in the late 90s that was under the Clinton years. And that's the one that I remember, from my youth as being the government shutdown. These the ones that we've had more recently have all been fairly short, or significantly shorter. There was one during the Obama years that I think was maybe 10 or 12 days where they shut the parks down. They were really trying to show the pain to people. But this one, still going, shows no signs of stopping. I mean, what's the breaking point? It looks like the president's going to hold firm on his position.
Right. That's what we've seen. Now, we talked a little bit about what he can do if he decides to call an emergency, a state of emergency, then the shutdown could discontinue and he could just do it that way.
Yeah, and he says that he has the authority to do that, and he's had the lawyers look at it, and that might well work. I mean, it's hard to know in today's environment. The word that I'm hearing is that if he tries to declare the emergency, he's going to get sued immediately by a number of groups to ask the courts to determine whether or not it's truly an emergency. Which here again, I mean, it's like par for the course with the president. He does something, they tie him up in court for a couple of years, maybe a year. And then a lot of times the courts then afterwards will say, oh, no, he had the right to do that, kind of like shutting down the border to those 6 or 7 nations. I can't remember if it's 6 or 7 offhand, but, he basically said they were majority Muslim nations, and he basically said, that they were not going to be allowed to come into the country. And then he got, sued in the Ninth Circuit up in San Francisco, and then, a single judge kind of put the kibosh on it, and then went all the way up to the Supreme Court through the process, and the Supreme Court said he could do exactly what he did. Right. But they were able to stall him for a year. So I think they'll do the same thing if he tries to go the emergency route, and I've already seen him kind of setting up for that. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, I don't understand why the Democrats can't just give the country the wall that we need. Well,
but one of the frustrating things is these same Democrats were in support of it X amount of years ago. And there seems to be a greater issue now. Right. So all the more reason to support it.
Right. So we
know not really, because those could be potential voters.
They're just anti-Trump. Yeah, and it may be, you're exactly right there. It may be that they were supporting it verbally, and kind of like Hillary Clinton, remember, where she said it's important to have a public position and a private position. Right. And so basically it's important to lie to the public. That's what she's saying. Don't tell them what your real position is. Your real position is your private position. But your public position, that's what you say. You tell people what they want to hear. You tell them you want a border wall even though you don't, and then you go and you stymie it.
The private position is what your agenda is.
Right. And now it looks like the two have come together for Democrats because their public position is matching up with their private position. They don't want a wall. Of course, we think that maybe just that they don't want Trump to get something that he promised. Because, if he gets the wall, I mean, he's well on his way to getting reelected then. I mean, isn't he? Because he can line up these campaign promises that he can say he's kept. And the wall was the biggest promise of all.
Well, I agree with that, but I do have to wonder, because of how long this shutdown is going, it's creating this anxiety, this angst that we're hearing about more and more from mainstream media, who is not in support of him at all.
Right. Well, I'll tell you something interesting that's going on during the shutdown, and we covered this a little bit in the Sarge's time, is that the Democrats have all gone to Puerto Rico. Now, not all of them have gone to Puerto Rico, but a fairly large number of them. And I can't believe that they didn't really take into account the optics of that kind of a position. I mean, you've got a bunch of federal workers who you're at least paying lip service to them. You're saying, oh, they can't make it. They live paycheck to paycheck, and now they're not getting their paychecks, and they're being asked to show up for work, and that's not fair. But now you take a vacation. You go down to a fancy smancy hotel, and you hang out on the beach, and you do a lot of sunning, you drink your pina coladas, you just have a good time with a bunch of lobbyists. I mean, it sort of seems like you're out of touch with normal people, doesn't it? Wouldn't this be a smart time to kind of like tamp it down a little bit? Let's don't have a big party right now, since people are being asked to come to work and they're not even being paid right now. And I think it's 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck. We were talking about that last week.
Right.
It's like 80%.
But that's a business trip, Morgan. That's
right. That's right. They're doing the business of the people down there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just go look for that photograph of Bob Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, because he's doing the business of the people, and you can tell how focused
Bikini
on
business.
that. Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. That's all it is. You know, and it's some of the people down there, not a ton of them, but some of them are some of these folks that we've got lining up to run for president as Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, when you look at it, it looks to me like the Democratic field is going to be similarly crowded to the way the Republican field was in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at the beginning, back in it was late, whatever it was, 2015 or whatever, there were, 17 people running at one time in the Republican primary?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, already we've got 3 or 4 that have announced or about to announce for the Democratic primary. And, you know, I mean, it looks like it could be, again, another 15 to 20 people actually running.
Mm-hmm.
And so you wonder about some of those names because, you know, what are some of the ones that you've heard recently?
Julian Castro.
Yeah, Julian Castro, the former HUD secretary under President Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he is a very, very interesting guy. In fact, you really need to look into his background because his mother was part of something called La Raza. And if you don't know what that is, it means the race.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a group, a separatist group down in the Southwest made up of Chicanos. And that's, by the way, their preferred name.
Mm-hmm.
Those are Mexican Americans living in America. They prefer to be called Chicanos. I didn't realize that until I was reading up on this.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, this La Raza group, they wanted to create a breakaway country called Aztlan down in the American Southwest. And Julian Castro's mother, I think Rosie was her name, was one of the big members of that in the San Antonio area. And it's interesting because his campaign slogan is One Nation, One Destiny. And you go back and you look at some of the La Raza's campaign slogans, and I think he's trying to evoke those by that campaign slogan. Now, his brother, Joaquin, is down there in Puerto Rico and trying to probably line up support for him. But there was a few others we're going to tell you about when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show. We got a hard break. We'll be right back.
Morgan Streetman's show continues, much like the shutdown, or not much like the shutdown. We continue all the time on a Monday at noon or at 5 p.m., and the shutdown continues to go on, and we talked about some of those from the Democratic Party who are down in Puerto Rico, spending some time down there.
And, you know, and spending some money because, I mean, those hotel rooms down there apparently where they're staying are over $400 a night. So they're living it up down there, and apparently food is being provided. And I'm sure that's by some of the lobbyists. You know, they put that together through R.J. Reynolds or some of these big companies who are down there lobbying as well. But you know, one of the points we were making is that Joaquin Castro, I almost said Joaquin Phoenix, but Joaquin Castro, the brother of Julian Castro, former head secretary, is actually down there with the group. And I suspect, based on how close he and his brother are, they're twins, actually, and very close. I suspect that he's probably down there lobbying I believe it's the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that's essentially down there, lobbying them to be behind his brother, who, again, they come from a La Raza family. And if you don't know about La Raza, the race, you need to look into it because it is a radical group of Chicanos, that'd be Mexican Americans, essentially, who want to separate, who want to secede from the United States and create their own country called Aztlan. And anyway, it's frankly, if you want to be honest about it, it's racist. You can read their statements on their websites and their other things. They're very racially oriented, anti-white. So, you know, again, back to the identity politics that President Obama had perfected in his administration. And this is a system of divide and conquer. Divide people along racial, ethnic, sex lines, whatever. Divide them, and they're going to be much easier to conquer. But let's talk about some of the other folks that are running for the presidency on the Democrat side. And some of these have announced, some have announced and then withdrawn the announcement, like, you know, one of our favorites, Michael Avenatti, the porn lawyer. You know, he had announced, and then I think the heat got a little hot for him when he got in trouble with his girl for beating up his girlfriend or whatever. We don't know what the true story was there. But he got in some trouble, and then he seemed to have backed off a little bit. Although I could see him trying again because that guy obviously just loves the media spotlight. Just loves it. Does. But you've surely heard about Kamala Harris, the California senator. We feel almost certain she's going to run. Joe Biden, the former VP under President Obama, and a Delaware senator, he's basically said he's thinking strongly about running. Although, by that time, he's going to be pretty up there. I mean, he's going to be like 76 or 80. He's going to be pretty old by that time. So I don't know. Certainly what we've heard is that the Democratic Party wants to go younger and hipper, more like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And, of course, she thinks it's completely unfair that she's not going to be able to run for president because she's not old enough. She thinks that's just ageism in action, I'm sure. But she's talking about running herself. Of course, she's going to have to wait about 8 years to get old enough to do that. But we've also heard Michael Bloomberg, who was mayor of New York City from 2002 to 2013, and a multi-billionaire, very active in the gun control movement. He's talking about running. How about Spartacus, Cory Booker, the New Jersey senator? He's talking about running, although I think he's denied that he wants to run now.
How about Andrew Cuomo?
Oh, another New Yorker, another guy who's not really proud of America and doesn't think America is an exceptional nation. That's kind of the hip line now among the liberals and the progressives. But yeah, you've got to imagine he wants to make a run for it, and he better act soon. He's got his brother on TV right now, so now would be a good time to get some favorable coverage. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, if you haven't heard of him, I mean, he's the guy that after Colorado accidentally dumped all that waste into the Colorado River, remember, he went down, got himself a cup of it, and drank it on TV just to prove that it was completely fine. So that guy wants to be your president. I mean, just think about that a little bit. I mean, that, you got to wonder.
That's a stunt.
Is he playing with a full deck? Is he playing with a full deck? I'm not sure.
How about that billionaire?
Oh, Tom Steyer, the billionaire from California. Yeah, another billionaire wants to get in the race. Now, I actually kind of like Tom Steyer in some ways because he's very humble. He doesn't live like a billionaire. And I always admire guys that make a lot of money and then don't live like it. But he's a very well-known progressive. He funds a lot of progressive causes. I obviously don't like that part of his personality very much since it disagrees with what I think politics should be. How about Oprah Winfrey? Now, she said no, but, I mean, you've got to think that there's still going to be some folks going back out to try and persuade her that she needs to get in the race at some level, and she would be a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. Hillary Clinton, I mean, is the third time the charm with her? That campaign slogan might well resonate with folks, as many people as think that Hillary is actually a witch. Third time's the charm. So... Another one we've heard, Bernie Sanders wants to get back in the race. Of course, we haven't mentioned Beto O'Rourke, the former Texas representative who didn't win the Senate election, but he's also talking about running. And then the one guy, the dude, Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg has... Go ahead.
How can he run for president with all the bad press?
Don't you have to be at least 25 to run anyway?
Yeah, you got to be 35, but he's there now, and I think.
But the scary thing about him, if we think the Russians meddled in Facebook ads, this guy's going to have the market cornered on Facebook ads.
You might be right. He might be like 33 or something, right?
34.
34. Okay, so he'll be there. He'll be there. So he'll be there just in time to run. And think about it. If he's got Facebook behind him, I mean, that is, he's got a leg up on a lot of other people. But he's another one, though. I don't know if you ever watched any of his testimony or seen his interviews. He doesn't, as amazing as it is that he's built Facebook, he doesn't seem like he's an intellectual superpower. And that's why a lot of folks call him the dude. The dude. Because he kind of seems like the dude who started something in his dorm room and still basically lives in his dorm room, almost. Right. You know what I mean? That's kind of his personality. And, of course, that brings us to our very last person that we have on our list. And, by the way, there is a bigger list here. And, by the way, I left one out, too. I want to make sure and mention her.
Okay.
Because I really like her. That's Tulsi Gabbard, Hawaii representative.
From Hawaii.
Yeah.
You like her.
I like her. Now, look, I don't agree with her politics necessarily, but I think she is a real solid candidate. Okay. I think she's going to be a very strong candidate. And then that brings us back around to our very last one on the list, which is Dwayne Johnson with The Rock. And I actually think he's the strongest Democrat candidate.
Do you think, it always makes me laugh when I think about sometimes how mad Democrats get at President Trump, because years ago he was more, they looked at him as an ally. And if you look at his politics today, we've made comparisons in the past, he's as liberal as Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Basically, even though he's a Republican president, he still has policy that would have been deemed liberal back when Bill Clinton was president.
Sure.
So my point with this, do you think that Dwayne DJ, as we now know, would be somewhat of a conservative Democratic president?
I think it's an interesting question. I think what we do when we get these entertainers is we get folks that haven't spent a lifetime thinking about their political positions and maybe don't think about them from a philosophical perspective. Maybe don't start from what we call here on the show first principles, which is how we try to think about things, or at least how I try to think about things, which is setting out your basic philosophy on a big level and then applying that to individual issues. And I think most of what people do is they hear about individual issues, they kind of make a gut determination, they go with their gut on that, on their feeling, and then they try to cobble everything together one way or the other. And that's why you have folks being so inconsistent all the time. You have when you go and you play the clips like we did last week that show the Democrats saying we need to have a wall, and you tell people about it, but you don't tell them who it is. They think that this is probably some Nazis associated with Trump. And then if you tell them, oh, no, these were Democrats just about 10 years ago, I mean, people's face it just like it does not compute. They don't even know how to deal with that. And instead of being able to really come up with a coherent system in their own minds of the way things work and the way that they should work. And I'll tell you, the propaganda has gotten so thick, you really feel bad for people. I do, at least. And we had some of that last week, so we brought it back for you because we wanted to play some of it for you. And we heard some pretty thick propaganda. And it's interesting because the clips that I've got are all Scott Pelley, who's on 60 Minutes. He's one of the anchors on 60 Minutes. And I don't actually have any of President el-Sisi's statements because what I was keying in is what Scott Pelley said about President el-Sisi before the interview. Now, let's start out because last week we did cover the Muslim Brotherhood clip with folks, and we're going to cover that one again because that one's worth hearing twice in my book. But let's start out with what Scott Pelley gave as the description of the el-Sisi government in Egypt. And we're going to put this into context because, folks, you need to think about this. You need to think about where Egypt came from before the el-Sisi government and what was going on there. And then let's hear how our own media is propagandizing the situation.
Opponents of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi have been imprisoned by the thousands. El-Sisi has strangled freedom of speech, and his troops have murdered protesters.
Think about that. So he's strangled freedom of speech, like with his bare hands? Was it even fair? Did he give freedom of speech a chance, or did he just strangle it, And then he's murdered people. This is so loaded up. It's amazing. Now, remember, President el-Sisi took over in a military coup from the Muslim Brotherhood. But the Muslim Brotherhood is not an innocent political organization, even though that's what Scott Pelley and the folks at 60 Minutes want you to think. Now let's listen to how they describe the Muslim Brotherhood.
The extremists, as he calls them, made up Egypt's largest political party, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is controversial. Its stated goal is peaceful pursuit of Islamic government, but over its 90 years, members have committed violence. The Brotherhood was one of Egypt's largest education, charity, and healthcare associations. Many members are middle class, academics, doctors, and lawyers.
So, that sounds like that's almost like a political group, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly, that couldn't be a terrorist organization. Of course, he starts out with what he calls extremists, and certainly there have been issues with some violence by some members in their past. And, of course, we have had on this show, from Understanding the Threat, the experts come on and show us the actual Muslim Brotherhood documents, which they've gotten, they got a hold of. And, up until the mid-2000s, I think it was 2006 or so, they were very straightforward on their website about what they wanted to do.
Sure.
Their whole goal was civilization jihad against the rest of the world, against the non-Muslim world. That was their goal, and they were open about it. Now they've gotten a little more political, and they've covered a little bit of that up, and they've tried to put a nice little veneer on it. But I'll tell you, it's really not a political organization in terms of their actual goals. Their actual goals are civilization jihad. And we don't really have the time to explain exactly what that is. It's a mixture of violent and nonviolent jihad, and it's mostly nonviolent, I would say, at this point. But their goal is to come in, take over the civic organization of a country. So in our case, our government. And I'll tell you, they're really making some inroads. So there's no reason to be scared of them. There's no reason to be an Islamophobe. But we do need to know what's going on, and we need to keep our eyes on what's going on politically. And we got some other stuff to cover for you. We had a couple more clips we aren't going to get to, but we got some fun stuff in the Out There segment when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder with you, and we are going out there right now. And we've got a couple different out there topics, nature related. That's the theme today.
Yeah, well, one of them is kind of a holdover. We were going to try to get it into one of these segments, and that is, and this is a question that I would ask you folks. I don't know if you know what a monarch butterfly looks like. Anybody who's sort of ever studied butterflies, and I've done a little bit of that in my past, knows it's a very distinctive look, and it's kind of a well-known butterfly. And, of course, we used to have them just by the thousands in Florida. I mean, probably hundreds of thousands or millions. I was curious to know if you can think of the last time you've seen one, because I know for me it's been a few years.
I can picture them, like how distinct looking they are, but I can't really think of the last time I've seen. Yeah, it's been a couple of years.
It's been a couple of years.
That also speaks to how little I go out in nature. That's true too.
Well, I have a garden that's designed to attract these types of things, butterflies, that is, and also hummingbirds. But anyway, so I used to see them quite a bit, but I hadn't seen them in ages, and I was wondering what happened to the monarchs. And now there's a study that's come out of California involving the University of Michigan and Stanford University researchers, and they have determined that the number of monarch butterflies is now at a potentially catastrophic and disturbingly low level, and that in the year 2017, so we're going back a year or two now, in the year 2017, there was a drop in the number of monarch butterflies by 86%.
In California.
In California. And so that is huge. So something's happening to the monarchs. Now, the easy answer you hear from people is climate change. I don't know that can really explain it because, I mean, let's face it, the climate change in 2017 wasn't that severe, was it? And what about the years before? So something's going on with the monarchs, and they are absolutely disappearing. Kind of a sad story. But now let's flip over and talk about our true Out There segment, which is the upcoming lunar eclipse.
That's right.
Which is going to be on the 20th, which will be Sunday. And so we won't get a chance to talk to you about it, which is why we're telling you about it today. But you need to mark this down on your calendar because it's not just a lunar eclipse. It is a super blood wolf moon. Now, what gets scarier than a super blood wolf moon? I don't know, right? Okay, and some of you may know what some of that means, but let's break it down for you. Okay,
break it down.
All right. A supermoon is a moon that's like within as close as the moon ever gets. It's within the 90% percentile of closeness. So the moon is really close to the Earth during a supermoon. And that makes the moon appear much bigger and brighter than it normally is. We've all seen that in the sky. Sometimes we look out and see the moon, and it's huge. We're like, whoa, I didn't know the moon was that big. Well, that's probably a supermoon you're looking at when you see something like that. And that's when the moon is within the 90th percentile of closeness to the Earth. Now, a blood moon is basically a lunar eclipse because that's what happens when the rays from the sun hit the Earth, which is blocking the moon, but some of the rays travel through the atmosphere and around and actually wind up on the moon, and the moon looks red. And if you remember a couple of years ago, we had like 4 of those in a row here.
Yes.
It was kind of a big deal as we're going out looking for them at night. Well, this is going to be a huge moon, and it's also going to be red. Now, what is a wolf moon? Who's ever heard of a wolf moon? Exactly. I love it. I love it. A wolf moon is the first full moon of the year. So this is the first full moon this year, okay? So we got a super blood wolf moon coming up on Sunday. It's supposed to be visible throughout the entire continental U.S., and very visible. So we should have a great view of it here in Florida as long as we don't have overcast skies or something like that. And, I mean, it's something to go out and see. So mark your calendars for Sunday night because you need to go out there and check this red moon out.
I'm trying to find, okay, it looks like it's going to be, so it's the 20th and 21st. So the lunar eclipse, the partial lunar eclipse will begin the 20th at 10:33 p.m.
Okay.
and it'll increase to totality by 11:41 p.m. So is that Saturday night? Am I doing
So
the
that
math
would
right?
be
No, that is Sunday night.
Sunday night. So I would say Sunday night, and you said about 11:41.
Starts at 10:30 to 11:41.
But the way these things
totality.
work is until they get to totality, you don't get the full effect. So it's better to figure out when totality is and maybe take a little nap and set your alarm to get up and go out at 11:45 or so.
Perfect. So we laugh, we make some jokes because when we talk about astronomy in this case, and then the other side of things, astrology.
Sure.
We talk to Janet Scialis every Thursday.
Star Goddess.
Right, the Star Goddess on the Sargis show, and you're there. And so it's funny because talking about astrology, someone once said to me who was a big astrology fan, she said, Roxanne, if you don't believe in astrology, let me just ask you this question. Do moons, or does our moon, I should say, affect bodies of water? Drastically so, when you think about the tides.
Sure.
What are we made of? 90+% water?
Hello.
So there's behavior that can derive from the positioning of the moons. Marc Charles's eyes are getting really big. Wow, mind blown. So I think that and I do feel like farmers follow the moon, certainly, as far as growth for their crops. And some people even follow moon behavior to plan their life. For example, when it's a new moon, that's when you come up with your brilliant idea, and then you execute, you take steps towards it in that first half of the moon cycle. Then at the full moon, it's illuminating everything. So that's a time to be creative and reveal your project or celebrate. And then after that, until the next new moon, you're giving thanks, you're showing gratitude, and you're sort of replenishing your own self to find that next inspiration.
Interesting. Well, of course, the Bible tells us that the moon and the sun, these things were put up in the heavens as signs. So it's not unheard of. And I've talked to Star Goddess about that, in fact. And that's one of the ways that she kind of merges some of her belief systems together. She says, look, this is kind of biblical. It does say you're supposed to watch these things. So it's very interesting. We talked last week, speaking of out there, we talked last week wondering what is the moon itself, and we didn't really... We weren't able to answer the question.
It's not cheese, we decided.
We knew it. Oh, it's not cheese, particularly it's not Swiss cheese. I don't. If it's Gruyere, you can have it. Okay, but give me some Swiss cheese. I like Swiss cheese. But in all seriousness, the idea of firing parts of the lunar lander back at the moon and seeing how it reacted, and it rang like a bell. I mean, it almost makes you wonder if the moon is secretly. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? The Death Star. I mean it's which is totally crazy. I get it. Totally crazy.
And in 2024, we're going to find out who's involved in moon collusion.
Ooh, yes, we are.
The moon.
And you know who's at the top of my list? The Chinese.
Yeah, the Chinese
because they
and
just
the
landed
Russians.
on the dark side. So
they got secret moon bases with the Nazis on the dark side of the moon, right?
And what about the other side of the moon that we can't see? What's going on there?
That's that side.
That's it.
That's where China went.
Wow.
Yeah, China just landed a little rover down there.
I have a lot of thinking to do.
They've supposedly sent back pictures, but it isn't as dark as we expected.
Really?
Right.
Yeah, but where's their cool video of two guys walking on the moon with their flag? I haven't seen that one yet.
That one's coming soon, Marc Charles. That one's coming soon. You better believe it. And what they can fake videos now, so I'm sure we're going to see all kinds of stuff like that.
Right, because they couldn't fake them back then.
But make sure you mark your calendar because this will be the last chance you get for a little while to see a big old blood moon, which is something to be seen at night. I have to tell you, having gone out and looked at the 4 that came, a year or two ago, some were better than others, but it was definitely something worth seeing. So mark your calendars for this Sunday evening. Starts about 10:45, and it should be reaching the totality about 11:45. Folks, thanks for joining us here on the Morgan Streetman Show. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And don't forget to exercise your brain at least once a week.